Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Common Free. I'm an employment relations practitioner and I have a whole host of other things that I talk about on this channel as well. Relevant for today's video is that last year, October, my husband and I and our two cats moved to Canada and we are now permanent residents of Canada. Our daughter Alba was born in February of this year and she is a Canadian citizen. As per the title of the video, I'm going to be discussing factors around whether or not somebody should use an immigration consultant. I did our entire application from start to finish. We did not use an immigration consultant or an immigration lawyer. The reason that I'm making this video is this is probably one of the most questions that I get messaged about when people see that I've made videos about moving to Canada is they ask me, should I use an immigration consultant? That's a really difficult question to answer. I don't know other people's circumstances, but I think maybe I'm just going to share our experience and some factors for consideration, and I'm hoping that they help anybody who needs to make this decision. Alright, so when I get asked this question, I can't answer this for you. I can't say with a definitive yes or no whether any particular individuals or their scenario should or should not use an immigration consultant. I'm literally just going to share our experience and some things to consider. So let me get into today's disclaimer for this video. I'm not an immigration consultant. I'm not an immigration lawyer. I'm in no way trying to give people advice from a professional sense to immigrate to Canada. I'm simply sharing my experience and information that may or may not be helpful. Please remember that if you need to contact a professional, if you want to verify information, please do so as it applies to your scenario. This is not advice, but also I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm not an agent trying to convince you to use some or other consultancy services. So first things first, immigration does take a lot of time and research. Or at least it took a lot of time for me and I did a lot of research. Long before we moved here, I looked into the exact route that we would be taking and I spent a lot of time combing through information that at that point you don't even know if it's relevant to you or not, but you're just going through it and getting a really good understanding of how the various immigration paths work and then which one is applicable to you. So from pretty much when I started looking into it, I did know the exact route that we were going to take, and I started then gathering information on the steps that we would need to take, like what needs to happen in which order for that exact route. I spent a lot of time on immigration Facebook groups, watching immigration YouTube videos, watching videos of people who had immigrated, and speaking to other individuals who I knew did this route to Canada. And I would ask them lots of questions and make notes about that experience. I would make notes about anything that I saw on Facebook or YouTube or the immigration website, what was relevant to us. I really started to gather that information and put it together before we embarked on doing the steps. So for us, I knew that we were going to do the express entry. Specifically, we were going to do the federal skilled worker avenue within the express entry. At the time, I didn't know whether I was going to make myself or my husband the main applicant. That we have very similar factors in terms of our professional experience and our age. So what it essentially came down to is I waited for the degree evaluation, and then based off of that, I was going to pick who was going to be the main applicant. And so I also had a more or less an understanding of the points that we needed to obtain to get picked and what they were based on and what it was kind of looking like our point would be. I share all of this to very briefly paint a picture that I had a very good understanding of the route that we aimed to take before we even embarked on those steps to taking it. Okay. So the two main things that I want to mention here is the first one is the time it takes to gather that information. From YouTube, from blogs, from Facebook pages, from the immigration website, from wherever. Lots of different sources gathering that information before you're even starting on taking the steps to immigrate. That is quite time consuming. So the question is, do you want to spend that time doing it, or do you want to have a consultation with an immigration consultant who may in an hour be able to tell you which avenue is for you and what the steps are for you? So one of the things is I did that all myself But if you're feeling that you don't want to spend your time there, maybe you rather want to have a meeting with an immigration consultant for that. The other thing is, the second thing, is that I knew the exact route that we were going to apply for. It wasn't, oh, we want to immigrate to Canada, how would we be doing that? And then trying to figure out how to fit into a route. From the get-go, I knew that we were going to take this avenue. We'd had friends and other people do it, so I understood that we met the requirements for this particular way of immigrating. It's also our preferred way of immigrating. We didn't want to immigrate on a work permit. So if you don't know the avenue that you want to take and you don't know the route that's applicable to you, that might be a little bit more tricky. So that either might require you to do more information gathering, or again, you might want to not spend that time gathering information and to just speak to an immigration expert for that. The decision I'm trying to point out here is one that we make with a lot of different things in our life. What are you going to do yourself and what are you going to outsource? Where do you want to place your resources in terms of time and money? For me, I didn't have a problem gathering this information. It didn't feel like a burden. At no point did I feel the need to have a consultation. It was interesting for me to read through all of that information. I didn't find it difficult. I didn't find it frustrating. So for me, that's why I did that part myself. All right, then moving on to the actual application and the steps to doing what you need to do as per the route that you're taking. In my opinion, the initial part of the application is pretty easy. The one that you're going to submit into the pool to get picked when they have the various rounds. That part I didn't find very extensive. It wasn't very difficult to do, but you have had to have done some documentation and some steps before doing that submission. So you got to figure that out and then do that. With the actual application, I would say the most important thing is a lot of attention to detail. While that initial one is not that difficult, you really don't want to make a mistake because you're getting picked on that initial one, and then once you're picked, you're going to have to prove that information, so you really don't want to make a mistake there. And then once you're picked, like I said, you're going to now have to prove those things that you said in your initial application. There's a lot of documentation that you need to get, and there's a lot of information that you need to provide about yourself and your spouse or anybody else going with you for the last 10 years in terms of your education, what you've been doing, your work experience, details about where you lived, details about your travel history. There's a lot of different information that you need to compile into that submission. My personal feeling about the use of a consultant for that is that if I was going to make a mistake, that would have been a mistake that the consultant also would have made. What I mean by that is when you're submitting 10 years of travel history, education, work experience, and where you lived, if I mess up a date, an address, some kind of qualification or something, I would have messed that up in giving that information through to the consultant. Obviously, having another person there kind of maybe gives you another layer of checking through things. But yeah, I didn't feel like those were mistakes that they were going to pick up on. So I did that, and then my husband checked it, and with every little step, it was like, check it like 10 times, do it really slowly before I move on to the next thing. All of that being said, value that a consultant or an immigration lawyer could add to this part is if you have something weird or unique or slightly out of the ordinary that is a part of your application. If you have a super straightforward application, then maybe it is not necessary. Ours was pretty straightforward. I'll explain what unique scenarios we had. But yeah, I think if you have a unique, difficult scenario or thing as part of your application, then maybe a professional would be helpful as to how to put that into your application or how to do that part of the application. In terms of, it's not that unique, but in terms of the unique thing that we had, the one thing that I wasn't like very clear on how to do, because again, there's a lot of information out there. Like there's a lot of immigration information. So the websites are very detailed. The YouTube videos are very detailed in terms of like the steps you need to take. So the one where I was a bit like, okay, this is different, is that I am and was self-employed. Now, because we're doing the federal skilled worker avenue, my employment is a crucial part of our application. So it's definitely not a part that I wanted to mess up. So what I did was I searched high and low for information on how to address that. And eventually I came down to, I think like an oldish Facebook post from someone else who had the scenario where I asked on Facebook and someone referred me to that is, how do I, because typically you would submit reference letters. So how do I do that when I'm self-employed? Because, I don't have a manager. And what I gathered there was that what other people had done, so I did the same, is I got a reference letter from my accountant, who's also been a client of mine, to say how long my business has been operating, what I do in my business, what role I play, and the services of mine that they can vouch for and they are familiar with. I think I also included letters of my company registration and anything else like confirmation that my business bank account was set up and things like that. So I felt, again, comfortable to do that myself. But had we had a scenario where I couldn't get that information or I wasn't comfortable, then maybe you do want to schedule an appointment with a consultant or a professional to do that. And in saying that, this is not me trying to convince anybody else to do it yourself or to use a professional. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I have no vested interest in what somebody else does with their application. This is just sharing various scenarios that came about for me. Me choosing to do that unique situation myself was obviously a risk that I was taking. I was taking it based off of somebody's Facebook comment. Like, that could have been wrong. They could have rejected our application because of that. I did feel like I provided sufficient proof of what I do in my business and how long my business has been operating. And I felt like I provided a good letter of explanation. So I felt comfortable with that, but you're still taking a risk when you choose to do that yourself. And then just like speaking about the risk taking, I mean, it is terrifying doing it. You do wonder, like, did I make a mistake? Did I do this one thing wrong? And often afterwards, like after I'd submitted all of our stuff, we submitted in so we got picked in 2020 and we submitted at the beginning of 2021. So it was a weird time where they weren't really processing the application. So it was a long time we waited. And that was a long time that I would see comments on Facebook and I'm like, oh, did I do it like that? When somebody asked a question, I would wonder, like, did I make a mistake there? So it's pretty stressful when you do it yourself. But I think it could be also very stressful if you use an immigration consultant. I think that was just a stressful time for all of us that were sort of just waiting to hear whether our application was now fully accepted or not. I did a lot to mitigate mistakes. I checked my stuff quite a lot. I was very detailed. I was very, very thorough. But obviously you're still nervous, and I spoke to other people who did it. And one of my friends who had completed this process that I'd known from school, I think he just reminded me that, you know, you submit it, you try not to make any mistakes, but they're not like punitive. Like, they're not going to come at me if I made like a very small error that is insignificant to the process. Obviously neither of us know whether that's true or not, but like our applications were accepted and everything is fine. But it just helped calm me a little bit in terms of that if there was something that maybe they would come back and they would ask me for that information if I didn't provide it adequately, rather than just outright reject it. So I think the reassurance that was given was, obviously if you lie, if you don't actually meet the requirements, or there's a genuine, like, you know, a major thing with your application, then it might be rejected and you can, I don't know if you can do anything about it. I've read that you can, but that didn't happen to us, so I don't want to speak about that. But that they would come back and say, hey, you know, this, we need more information here, or so forth. So that kind of just gave me a tiny bit of peace of mind that again didn't happen. But because it was a submission of 2020, 2021, we were required to do, I think it's called a Schedule A later on, and redo police clearance and redo our medicals, just because there was such a long time that everything stood still. But that was not because of an error in our application. Everybody who had submitted at the same time we did needed to do that. So yeah, what I will say is that part of the application, the main bulky part after you've been picked, completing that information is a lot. It's a lot of attention to detail. Do it slowly, do it meticulously, check yourself like a lot. Have a system to check it, have your partner check it, have somebody else check it, like the little numbers, like make sure you put your passport number in right, your ID number in right, all of that information in correctly. And then the other part where sometimes people like to, I don't know, use as services is with some of the things you want to write a letter of explanation. If yours is, again, slightly not ideal or not in the exact format that is preferred, then you write a letter of explanation with the documents that you submit, and you might want assistance to write those letters. I felt completely comfortable writing the letters. One of the examples that I will give where I was nervous about this, because again, it was one of those things that I did myself, didn't use a professional, and then you read up a lot and then you kind of hope that you're doing the right thing. Okay, I'm gonna have to wrap this up. She's getting over being here. But one of the things that I had read on the Facebook groups was that people were saying that the proof of funds, the amount of money, needs to be in your bank account for a minimum of 6 months at the time of submission. And mine wasn't, because I don't typically keep that money in a particular account, so I moved it from different places and from my husband's account to mine. So I was really nervous about that, and I looked on the immigration website, I looked everywhere, and I couldn't find that requirement. So until today, I don't know whether that is or isn't a requirement, but I wrote then a letter of explanation. I put in all my bank accounts, statements for the last 6 months, all of them, and I detailed exactly where the money came from. So I got a letter from my husband, he signed it, we showed his bank transfer and so forth to explain where that money came from, and that seemed to be accepted and was okay. I felt quite comfortable that I could detail that information very clearly. I've been a consultant for many years. I do have a master's degree. That's not me bragging. That's just saying a lot goes into a thesis in terms of things like referencing and so forth, where you learn to be very detail orientated with doing summaries and keeping information. And I felt comfortable in my skill set to do this application myself and to gather the information that we needed to be able to do it. So I think the important thing is to reflect on, what are you good at? What are you not good at? What do you need to outsource? What maybe can your spouse do if it's not your forte? Divide and conquer between the two of you. Can you get the information for what you need to do? Do you have any unique situations that you need assistance on how to deal with that? And do you feel confident in your ability to do the application? And then of course, weigh up the cost. Weigh up the cost of having a consultation with a professional versus doing it yourself, versus what would a mistake cost you if you make a mistake. Would using a consultant or a lawyer mitigate that likelihood of that mistake happening? And yeah, decide based off of the complexity of your case, as well as the time that it takes to do the application and gathering all that information, and whether you want to outsource that to somebody. All right, and that brings us to the end of today's video. I hope that this was somehow helpful in anybody's decision to make use of an immigration consultant or not. I'm obviously just speaking based off of our experience. You are welcome to comment below if your experience was different, or you think there are factors that I don't know about, I didn't consider, that you think are helpful for other people in making this decision, or if you did choose to use one or not to use one, maybe add some helpful stuff for other people. I've got other videos about our immigration process, and I will be making more videos on that, so subscribe if you'd like to see that, and let me know in the comments below what immigration or Canadian content you would like to see, and I'll get around to making that. Thanks for watching.